and welcome to The Point World Affairs. I'm Tae-sang-mi. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe have vowed to improve their countries' frosty relations in light of the United States' continued tariff war with China, also Japan's biggest trading partner. We discuss what the two Asian countries stand to gain and how the U.S. may respond to their sudden improvement in relations. For that, we have with us Dr. Woo Jung-yup, Research Fellow at the Sejong Institute. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Before we jump into the questions, let's take a brief look at Abe's first standalone journey to China in nearly 7 years.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited China on October 26 for the first time since taking office. He's also the first prime minister to visit Beijing in 7 years. On his trip, Prime Minister Abe and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang confirmed each other's hopes to improve bilateral relations and to strengthen cooperation in the financial and economic sectors. With that, they signed a bilateral currency swap arrangement worth more than $26 billion and promised to move ahead with infrastructure projects in third nations. What's more, Chinese and Japanese companies agreed on a massive economic cooperation plan worth $17.9 billion.
競争から協調へ、日中両国の関係は今まさに新たな段階へと移りつつあります。
双方同意就朝核问题开展沟通合作，中方支持日朝通过对话改善关系，妥善解决双方悬而未决的问题。
China and Japan have embarked on a new diplomatic and economic relationship. Earlier this decade, the two Asian countries underwent a territorial row over the Senkaku-Diaoyudao Island, which is located about 300 kilometers from Okinawa and 200 kilometers away from Taiwan. After the Japanese government nationalized the island back in 2012, relations between the two countries reached their worst. But on October 26, the two leaders of China and Japan met and confirmed that Sino-Japan relations have, quote, come back to a normal track.
中日关系励精曲折，在双方的共同努力下，两国关系逐步理顺，重回正常轨道。
But while the territorial dispute between China and Japan is still yet to be settled, what's behind the drive to improve relations and cooperate? We discussed the sudden turn of events in detail on this week's The Point World Affairs.
Dr. Woo, Japan and China, they're very close in terms of physical distance. But why did it take a Japanese prime minister to make that China visit in 7 years?
China and Japan's relations is somewhat similar to our relations with Japan. So we believe that our relations with Japan is very complex because of our historical issues with Japan, and Japan has not thoroughly apologized what they did during the colonization period with us. And same thing can apply to relations between China and Japan. And China believes that Japan has not apologized fully for what they did, the war period in earlier 20th centuries. And Japan believes that they didn't owe much to China. So because of these historical issues, the two countries' relations has been very cold. And not only for that, with the recent rising of China's power in the region, China tried to assert its influence in the region. For example, they want to make the issue of Senkaku-Diaoyudao Island because in early 80s, two countries have agreed that they don't want to make this issue too big because it can tackle the relations between two countries. However, with China's power rise in the region, China tried to make this issue bigger than before, and Japan has problem with those issues. So not only the historical issues, but also the current security and the regional influence issues make it very difficult for two countries reconcile in the recent years.
I understand. And so how do you see the recent meeting between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Abe? Was it successful to mend their bilateral relations? What do you think?
So This is merely a first step for two countries to reconcile the relations. So we cannot say that this first meeting between two leaders can reconcile everything, the issues that two countries have to have. So I think that there are reasons that why two leaders decide to meet at this point in the history, because now Japan has good relations with the President Trump, but at the same time, President Trump does not really value highly of alliance with Japan, and Japan can be also the target of President Trump trade war. And China, not only it has the competitive relations with the United States in the region with regard to the security affairs, but also it's facing a very heavy trade war with the Trump administration. So two countries might believe that the meeting between two leaders would evolve into some kind of relationship that can mitigate the pressure from the U.S. Respectively.
Right. It's not just the relationship between China and Japan. It's actually the relationship very matters from the United States and other countries as well. So let's connect to experts to find more about it.
As Prime Minister Abe's visit to China is rapidly improving ties between the two countries, many are now wondering how this will affect the U.S.-China tariff war. This is as the leaders of the two major Asian nations have joined forces to speak out against President Donald Trump's America First policies. In particular, China, which has strongly criticized Trump's trade offenses as threatening free trade and multilateral trade order, has shown the world that it has secured the world's third largest economy as its ally. The U.S. is also paying close attention to the impact that improved Sino-Japanese relations will have on its economy. Against this backdrop, Prime Minister Abe has also invited Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to his house in an attempt to strengthen ties with India. In particular, Abe, who decided to cooperate with China on its Belt and Road Initiative during his visit, discussed America's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy with Modi. What is Prime Minister Abe's intention behind this diplomatic maneuver between the U.S. and China? China and Japan decided to leave their territorial dispute behind to seek economic cooperation and practical gains, while the U.S. continues to add trade pressure on China and Japan under its protectionist policies. We talked to local experts to see whether or not these three countries, which are mired in diplomatic, security, and economic interests, can ultimately get what they want.
We have a local expert in Japan for more analysis. We have Dr. Akio Takahara, Dean of Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo. Doctor, good to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Prime Minister Abe has announced the so-called three principles of China-Japan relations after meeting President Xi, while China is receiving criticism for lacking details. Do you think the two countries are on the same page regarding the outcome of the summit?
Basically, yes. Mr. Abe has been to China before, but this is the first official visit in the past 7 years. And the three principles, the Chinese haven't come out clearly saying this from their side, but I'm pretty sure that they basically agree with those three lines. Three principles that were presented by Mr. Abe are as follows. The first one is that not competition, but we should collaborate. Rather collaborate than compete. That's the first point. And the second point is that we shall not be threats to each other, but we shall be partners. And the third point is that we should aim for a free and fair economic order in the region and the world. Those are the three principles. So, as you can see, there's, I'm pretty sure there's no objection from the Chinese side to all of those points.
So it seems like China and Japan are on their way to cooperating together, but the United States, which is a traditional ally for Japan, has been prompting Prime Minister Abe and Japan to actually maintain good relations with the United States. But right now, at this point, when Japan is not in a best relationship with China, why do you think Prime Minister Abe is pushing for good relations with Beijing?
Well, irrespective of what the United States policy is towards China, always it is to the benefit of Japanese national interests to improve our relations with China. Think of security needs, think of economic needs. It's quite clear, I think, in the eyes of anybody that improving relations, developing relations with China is good for Japan. So I think any country in between the sole superpower, the United States, and the sole superpower candidate, China, is in the same boat, as it were, with Japan. We have to have good relationships with Washington, but we need to develop a relationship with Beijing at the same time.
And speaking of the relationship with the United States, how about the TPP withdrawal? What is Japan's ideas on that?
Well, we always hope that the U.S. will come back to the TPP. We believe that it is to their benefit to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we hope at the same time that other countries, including Korea, in the future, including China, will be joining us, because we think we have good rules for our economic partnership and development. So that's what we hope. And maybe since Mr. Trump himself decided on withdrawing from TPP, he may need some amendment. I'm not too sure. But if we can frame it in such a way that he can think this is Trump TPP, TPP, as it were, Trump TPP, then I think there's a possibility that he will see the benefit that it would bring to the United States.
Thank you. That was Dr. Akio Takahara of University of Tokyo. Dr. Wu, so we just heard about the analysis of Dr. Takahara, but what do you think about this recent diplomatic move of the Prime Minister Abe, which he initially heavily relied on the United States, but recently it seems like he's moving that focus towards China?
So it looks like that Prime Minister Abe tried to expand his portfolio of his diplomatic front, but it does not mean that the importance of the United States onto Japan is diminishing. So Japan's security policy is based on its alliance with the United States, and it will be very unlikely that it's going to be changed in the near future. So based on the security alliance with the United States, but there are some things that U.S. and Japan has different opinions on the trade and the security architectures in Northeast Asia. And China would be the main security threat to Japan, and that's why Japan needs a security alliance. But at the same time that United States, especially President Trump, argues that the international organizations in the international arrangement like World Trade Organization is not beneficial to the United States, but at the same time, those WTO kind of arrangement is beneficial to the China and Japan, which are heavily dependent on the trade. So I think that that is why Japanese Prime Minister tried to expand its diplomatic front with China, not because that it's going to cut its relations with the United States or less depend on the United States, but to try to have more assets in the future to increase its own national interest.
So that's why he proposed these three principles, which includes partnering up with China then.
So I think that because of its historical hatred and historical animosity, that it's very difficult for politically reconcile Japan's interest with the China's. So I think that Japan's Prime Minister tried to appeal to its own public and also try to send a message to the United States that Japan has the capacity to expand its diplomatic front.
We now connect to an expert in Hong Kong. We have Victor Teo, an assistant professor of Japan program at the University of Hong Kong. Welcome, Dr. Teo.
Thank you.
Is China making efforts to improve relations with Japan due to the U.S. trade dispute? Can economic cooperation with Japan help China with its trade balance?
Well, yes, I think one of the very important reasons is because of the deteriorating relationship with the United States. But I wouldn't chalk it down just to the U.S. factor. I think both the Chinese and the Japanese leadership have felt it's actually long overdue that both countries should actually try and speak to each other. After all, there hasn't been actually a host of high-level exchange of visits. I think this is a good opportunity, particularly with the U.S. Having trade difficulties with both Japan and also with China, that both leaders want to make effort at reconciling both nations.
Right, despite this reconciliatory mood between Beijing and Tokyo, it still seems like Japan is putting its traditional ally as its priority. What about that on China?
Yes, but likewise, the Chinese priority is also the United States. It's not Japan. So this is in some ways this situation is comfortable for the both of them. So I think right now, since the Chinese couldn't actually do a whole lot with the Americans given Trump's trade war, but I think now they are shifting their mindset and preparing for things to be sour for the long haul. So right now they are actually looking for alternatives, and Japan seems to be one option which they can pursue. Obviously, the Chinese are prepared to go it alone. They are also keep working on the Belt and Road project, so they want to bring Japan into the Belt and Road project. So to that extent, I don't think there's conflict there, vis-a-vis Japanese preference for the United States.
Right, and many experts say that Japan will be participating in China's Belt and Road Initiative. So what does that mean for Japan?
Well, I think certainly this accords the Japanese an opportunity, first of all, to reconcile to a certain extent with the Chinese, and to shift gears and bring bilateral relations to a more normal state. This is one of the key goals that I think the Prime Minister Abe wants to do. After all, it's because of him and his political platform that the Chinese actually refused to talk to him for a period of 7 to 8 years. So I think before he tries to step down in the near future, this is one of the key goals that the Japanese Prime Minister wants to achieve. Secondly, I think because of the trade tensions that Japan is also having with the United States, and also because of the fact that the United States pulled out the TPP partnership, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that both the Obama administration and also Abe has worked very hard on. It leaves things in a limbo. So Japan is actually trying to leverage on both the TPP and the Belt and Road Initiative to try and boost her own economy. And to that extent, Japan has been finding of late that competing with the Chinese in third markets is a big problem because it becomes a zero-sum game. So, for instance, they were competing to build a railway in Indonesia, and sometimes things just don't work out for one party. So it becomes a situation where things are very tense for both countries politically. So one country will win all the contracts and the other country won't win. So right now, I think they're trying to make it such a way that both China and Japan can actually gain from co-investing in these third countries. And joining on the OBOR projects seems to be a way out for Japan. So this is, I think, a good opportunity. On the part of the Chinese, having the Japanese on board for OBOR projects will actually lend more legitimacy to the entire project. And this is something that I think they look forward to.
Dr. Teo, and Western countries, including the United States, have been criticizing China for using this BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, to pave the road for a new hegemony. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think every country has their own sovereign right to decide on what kind of economic policies they want to undertake. And under China, I think they see it as a natural extension of the Chinese economic developments that they have taken over the past 20 to 30 years. From the Chinese perspective, it's not a new Marshall Plan to, bring in all the surrounding countries under its orbit, but really it's probably an avenue for Chinese developers and Chinese businesses to expand outwards, to provide business and services to third countries that may otherwise have difficulties securing them from the OECD countries or the G7. So the Chinese are reaching out to the Central Asians, to say the Baltic states, to the Middle Eastern countries, Latin American countries. And we have to understand that historically, the Chinese actually have very good connections, good relations with this country. This is something that has happened since Mao Zedong came into power. The Chinese are always maintaining that we are part of the Second World. We're leaders of the developing country. And this is, I think, from the Chinese perspective, this is a natural thing to do. But obviously, from the American perspective and from the Japanese perspective, this is a new ballgame entirely. And what they are really worried is that the Chinese have the ability to develop asymmetrical relations with all these countries, asymmetrical political and economic relations. Here we have the Japanese on one hand proposing TPP, and of course, the Trump administration has just announced a new agency that will look after third world investments in third countries. So they are trying to, if you like, compete against Chinese for influence in these countries. But really, I think the main beneficiaries of these policies are the countries that are at the receiving end of these investments. If they are careful, I think they can make very good opportunities of these people or these countries competing to give them money to build infrastructure.
Thank you. That was Dr. Victor Teo of the University of Hong Kong. Thank you. Doctor, so let's talk about this BRI a little bit. It's an ambitious dream that expands from Asia to Africa to Europe via land and sea, I heard. Can you tell us more about it? And what are some of the historical strategies that's similar to this?
So China's One Belt, One Road strategy is not purely economical in a sense that China wants to expand its influence not only in the region, but also in other parts of the globe. So that is why recently Vice President of the United States, Mr. Pence, made a speech that China's economic strategy is not purely economical, but has a strategic background. That is why United States has to have more competent relations with China than before. So now Japan has more kind of a headache situation. That One Belt, One Road initiative by China certainly provide opportunity for Japan to expand its economic opportunity as well as its presence over the Asia, but at the same time, helping China expanding too much influence in other regions can actually diminish Japanese security interest. So how far Japan can cooperate with China with regard to its BRI is very complicated issues. And now U.S. made it much more complicated because United States view it as a more strategic rather than economic. So China's BRI is not only economical but strategic. So that shows the China's intention to exert its influence not only in the region but also the other part of the globe. So now many countries in the region has to calculate whether the participating, then if participates, how much they should participate. And if they accept China's BRI money, then how much they should accept. So these are the questions that to be answered in the near future by many countries in the region and other parts of the globe. And United States has the question of the intention by Chinese government, this move toward other part of the globe.
And so if the second largest, the world's second and third largest economies really do cooperate hard, and if they work together, then do you think that they can counter President Trump's trade offensives?
So the problem now that Japan and China commonly has is the skepticism that President Trump and the U.S. administration has the trade organizations. So the U.S. government believed that in the past, by accepting China into the WTO, they can convert China into more democratic, more transparent country, which can lead to the more contribution to the international community. However, U.S. administration believed that accepting China into WTO actually harms U.S. interest, not only economic but also strategic, and China has not changed it at all. So now the reason why U.S. trying to move in the direction of isolationism is not only because that they got deficit in trade, but also the strategic reason that by calming down the Chinese rise in the trade area, the U.S. can actually succeed in terms of security front. So now the problem is that Japan can get benefit from the WTO, but U.S. does not like WTO in the security reasons. So how balance Japan's move in economic and the security area is very tricky. And China, with knowing that Japan has this dilemma between the U.S. and World Trade Organization, so China wants to take advantage of these kind of issues. At the same time, China is getting benefits from WTO China wants to stay in the WTO as long as possible. So three countries, these complicated relations make it very difficult for the observers to expect what kind of outcomes that we are going to see in the future.
Right, let's keep close tabs on the developments going on, especially in this very important region of Northeast Asia. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you. Both China and Japan have joined forces for practical reasons, but historical disputes between the two countries are still unresolved. It remains to be seen whether or not their cooperation will ultimately lead to tangible gains. That's all we have for this week's Point World Affairs. Thank you for tuning in, and see you again next week.